can you share with us some insights as to what you think makes a successful joint venture or an alliance?
Sure. Yeah. I'll try. Look, there are a couple of things, none of which are terribly complicated. In fact, well, I think you might have mentioned it, but one of my mantras is about keeping things simple. So, they are essentially simple things. It's a relationship, right? So, notwithstanding everything else, yes, you can't ever forget that it's a commercial relationship. You can never ever lose sight of that.
Welcome to the People Leaders Podcast, the audio resource for managers and business leaders creating high-performing teams. Join leadership and team development experts Jan and Michelle Turkelson each week as they explore both subjects from every angle. Through practical tips, valuable insights, and compelling interviews with leadership experts around the world, you'll learn how to bring out the best in your staff and how to give your best as a leader.
Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to People Leaders Podcast. Really excited about this particular podcast. I'm going to introduce to our newest member, which is Richard Nedov. We have worked with Richard a couple of years ago on a leadership program, and he's going to be joining the People Leader community as a consultant and also facilitator. So Richard, we worked with, like I mentioned, a couple of years ago on I think it was like a 12-month to an 18-month leadership program. And we were really impressed with his ability to develop relationships with people, but also bring, high-level strategy down to a really pragmatic day-to-day operational level. So we actually got to see the link with what the strategy was and what people actually need to do. And Richard is a really, respected business leader and director. He's got deep experience across so many industries like power, renewables, water, logistics, and also he's got a pretty good, I hear, proven track record in business turnaround. And I've actually seen this in the way in which he manages his relationships. So welcome, Richard.
Thank you, Jan.
Yay! So is there anything else that you want to share about what you do? Because I'm also interested in some of the things that you do with the Indigenous communities and population. What have you been doing lately?
Sure. Well, actually, a lot of the stuff I do with the Indigenous Land Corporation and the Indigenous Business Australia is more around their increased focus on commercialisation, if you like, and then ultimately, getting a greater benefit for the Indigenous estate, to use a term that IBA have been using. So really focusing on turning it more into utilising, the access to funding and the like that they have, A, and B, what they generate, and actually turning it into a real benefit for the Indigenous estate. So it's it's a high level, view of what I'm doing, but it ranges to everything from, their executive development through to the practicalities of procurement, how they spend their money, and even their infrastructure and future infrastructure, how to get the best value out of it.
How satisfying.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Yeah, good for you. Okay, so Richard, let's jump in, because part of this is to introduce you, but also to see if we can learn something from your extensive background. So one of the things that I know in your background was developing really good alliances and joint ventures. So can you share with us some insights as to what you think makes a successful joint venture or an alliance?
Sure. Yeah. I'll try. Look, there are a couple of things, none of which are terribly complicated. In fact, well, I think you might have mentioned it, but one of my mantras is about keeping things simple. So, they are essentially simple things. It's a relationship, right? So, notwithstanding everything else, yes, you can't ever forget that it's a commercial relationship. You can never ever lose sight of that. But it is also a relationship, and what makes it successful, again, are some pretty simple aspects. So a total commitment to it, that's the way you'll execute whatever it is you're going to do. Work collaboratively, obviously. That's the reason you're in a joint venture to begin with. Transparency, I think that's a key one that people often lose sight of. They have a view of, what can I tell my JV partner? It should actually be the opposite. Rather more a case of, well, what can I tell? I should be beginning from a position of being completely transparent. Hugely importantly, not arguing about the size of the effort, the share of the effort, the split of who does what and everything else. And probably ultimately in terms of practicalities, always keeping your eyes on the prize. What are we actually here for? I'll talk a bit more about all of those. But the one thing I also can't forget, and that's most important, is that it has support from the top, for want of a better way of putting it. So that the leadership of the various organisations, the 2 or 3 or whatever they may be that are in the joint venture or alliance, their leaders must be totally committed to it, not how shall I say, not just paying lip service to it, and then as soon as they're away from it going, what can we get out of this? It's a case of, well, we're in the joint venture, we're in the alliance, let's deliver the outcome. So that was the eyes on the prize bit, and let's do whatever we need to do within the JV and also within our own organisations to ensure we get there. So, most importantly, the overall governance and leadership and consistency in that regard.
That's beautiful. Starts from the top. And everything that you've said, such as total commitment, collaboration, transparency, not arguing about the size of the effort, eye on the prize, total support from the top, it's kind of like that's the foundation of, a high-performing team, isn't it? And that level of trust is that foundation.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, trust underpins those, and that's one of the hardest things in business. For people to trust, and to be honest, I mean, commitment's something you can do, but the difficulty is trust, because that then I guess dictates the level of transparency you're comfortable with. I think you have to, with the right leadership. So I'm always going to underpin it with the right leadership, and I mean from the very tops of the organisation. Then you can have that trust, and you can start from a base of, well, I'm going to be completely transparent.
Okay, so what would you see? Because we always try to bring it down to a real practical behaviour that's observable, because that's something that perhaps we can teach and model. So when you say it actually starts from the top, what behaviour would you be seeing if someone in that high leadership position is supporting, is trusting?
Look, again, relative. So you have to establish a governance regime. So that there is, there are various terms, but for the for the meeting of the minds of the tops of the organisations in an alliance, a joint venture, or otherwise. But there has to be a forum where the leaders of those 2 or 3 or however many, but let's say those couple of organisations, to get together visibly and seen by their team, and they show their commitment to the, I'll just use the term JV. They have to show their commitment to the joint venture. So the behaviour is visibly both leaders of both organisations, if it's 2, have a regular get together, discuss the issues, and they're visible to the team as being committed to the venture or the alliance.
Yeah, great. Okay, because that's something that you can observe, isn't it?
Absolutely. It can't be, I'll leave it to my general manager or executive general manager. I mean, titles vary, but it has to be the most appropriate leader in each organisation, visible, say, okay, they're committed, so that the teams can see and say, our leaders are committed to this, so we should be committed to it. And if those 2 people at the top of the organisation trust each other, then we should trust each other.
Yeah, great. So that leads me to another question, Richard, is the thing that we saw you do really well is your ability to build strong relationships, and there was a lot of loyalty that you had amongst your team. So can you just share with us how you do this, and perhaps a story where you actually had to turn around a relationship?
Yeah, sure. I'll try. I mean, I've had the good or bad fortune, if you like, in my career, because it was, in the 30 odd years of you encounter a lot of things, both good and bad relationships. So, I consider them all pretty valuable experiences, to tell you the truth. And, if you don't learn from them, then you're doing something wrong. So I would always look at everything as a bit of a learning opportunity. But look, my approach to building relationships is pretty simple. Even at my own level, it's about trust and transparency, and openness. I think someone can always understand where you're coming from better if you give them context. I mean, that works in so many different ways, right? That works even in change management, right? If people understand why you're changing, it helps you go down the change path. But anyway, I guess back to relationships again. Me personally, I guess I always start from a position of trusting people. That can have its own pitfalls, to tell you the truth. I mean, it's probably brought me unstuck a few times earlier in my career where I haven't, thought things through or assessed things fully. Let's put that in a better way before just immediately, having total trust. But nevertheless, like I say, underlying trust and transparency. As for difficult relationships, I suppose one that springs to mind in more recent times was actually a joint venture, was actually an alliance that included both an alliance partner in delivery with the organisation I was with. I think you mentioned Broad Spectrum or Transfield at the start, and a common client. And we had problems at every level. So first things, I think one of the things I mentioned that was key was not arguing about the split of the work. There was essentially a split of expertise in, I guess, employee relations, to use a collective term, from our side of the organisation, and then the technical side of delivery came from our joint venture partner and our alliance partner on the owner's side, or client. Obviously expected an overall delivery of the outcomes, with them involved on the planning side and the infrastructure side and everything else. Now, when what I encountered as that became part of my business was a grossly, unbalanced, let's put it that way, unbalanced state of affairs between those three partners, insofar as there was always discussion of, well, you're only supplying this much, we're supplying that much, yet it's a 50-50 share on the delivery side. These sorts of arguments were happening. But all of that crept in because at the basic level, I don't think we were delivering. So we were not meeting our commitments. Missed a few, I guess, deliverables early on in the piece. I think one of the things we were obligated to do was the transition and the startup of the contract. Anyway, fundamentally, we weren't meeting commitments. So what had developed over a period of time was a lack of trust, less and less, I guess, openness, and more sniping, and then more discussion about who's delivering what to who's meeting their commitments and at what level in this relationship. So I guess we were also passive in the relationship, if that makes sense. The client was actively seeking outcomes. Our JV partner was actively throwing in technical solutions and bringing expertise from elsewhere, and we seemed to just be chasing our tails. So how do we fix that? We looked like poor bungling cousins almost. But nevertheless, how do we fix that? Pretty simple. It was one of those things where we had to make a drastic change by changing people, unfortunately, and asserting ourselves at the joint venture level with the right competency and the right leadership and those that make an effort in building relationships. It was actually an exercise in me looking for to use a title, a general manager who probably had less technical ability, more ability in building relationships, recognising where issues were and just really working hard in that area. And then importantly, being a really hard driver to deliver on commitments and as far as possible, fixing sins of the past. And I'd like to say, I guess, at the end, and not only did we do that, but the COO of the client organisation actually became a referee for that responsible general manager when she left the organisation. So that's how strongly the relationship was repaired. But what it was actually, I guess, putting the cards on the table, admitting, okay, this is where we are, give it to us, let us know where are the shortcomings, what are they, and then making a commitment to repair them by putting the right leadership in, ensuring that we were able to reach back into the organisation to deliver in the joint venture and I guess have build a position of absolute equality at the I guess at the joint venture table. So we weren't the poor bungling cousins, but rather, you know, an equal contributor delivering the outcomes that were there. I mean, it's a relatively high level discussion, and we've probably got a lot more complex than that. But yeah, that was
a good summation, because ultimately what I heard about that is it's not just about technical competency. It really is about this ability to understand the impact that you are having on others, because you don't manage tasks, you actually manage people who then, you know, do the work. And so what I'm interested in now, Richard, is just exploring. So when people are hearing that, and they may not even be in a joint venture, they may be working in an organisation, they may be a people leader or a team member, it's having the courage to actually lay your cards on the table and getting feedback from people, because you know at some level it's just not working, the relationship or the work that you're doing. So how did you then bridge that, or could you give us some insight as to how do you then get feedback that's really true, clear, and then just not wishy-washy?
Well, it's tricky. I mean, there's no magic to it other than, you know, just repeatedly asking the question. And you might start small. I mean, you might start, here's this one thing that I know we didn't do terribly well. Just tell me a bit about that. So build a small amount of trust in that by repairing, addressing, dealing with whatever might be necessary to tackle that one small piece, rather than saying, give me everything, tell me everything that we're doing wrong, right? So, tackle things in bite-sized pieces, if you like, in encouraging feedback specifically, if that's what you're...
Yeah, I love that. Start small. Start small. Because that's the thing. It's like you want to master what's in front of you first before you move on to something else, because that's the foundation, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I hark back to the example I talked about, you know, there was, at a high level, it was, we were the poor bungling cousins, weren't seen as doing our bit, and as a result suffering, and in my view, in 2 years' time, we'd have been pushed out of the relationship. So we didn't come and say, right, wow, what are we doing wrong? It was, well, tell me specifically what started going wrong here. Okay, the IT transition. All right, well, let's fix the IT side of things. Bang, knock that over, move on from there, right?
Yeah, so you can build momentum and traction, etc. Beautiful.
Yeah. And build credibility.
Yeah, that's right. Which actually is a component of building trust.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so you were known as a pretty pragmatic leader. So, being able to solidify what those actions and behaviours are from an operational level. So can you share with us what it looks like in a day-to-day situation? Like, how do you keep people focused and their mind on the big picture, especially when they're kind of like in their own little cubby trying to do the thing they're doing? Yeah,
look, I like to leave them in their own little thing to do what they're doing, as you put it. But you need to be sure, I suppose, that everyone's doing what they should be doing and not be distracted, if you like. But look, I get my approach simply is I've always said that my job is to support my people to do their job. Putting it kind of bluntly, it's not to do their job. It's not necessary. It's to actually support them to do theirs. I would always seek to build a team that could and should ultimately be able to take on my role. I guess it's something that I tried to, if I didn't repeat it verbally, which I would do now and then, I'd always show it by action. So I would, I would ask, I ask questions. Like I say, I ask questions rather than provide solutions. So even if I know the answers or what I think the answers should be, I'd ask questions. But now, how are we going to do this? How do you think that should be done? And so on. And even if I do know, even if I think I do know what the answer is, sometimes I have gone the other way because, obviously I listen to what my people have to say. And, if I happen to... but if I think that, if I think they're heading in the wrong direction, I suppose I'll tell them. So my interaction, if you like, is one of saying how things going. What are your challenges? Where do you need some? Do you need some support? In what area? How do we do that? How do we make this happen? Rather than do this, do that. I think that's wrong. Carry on. So, as I say, it's a more of a supporting thing.
Yeah, challenge and support.
Yeah,
that's good. And also, like questioning rather than telling. And there's a little bit of a fine line for that, especially in a leadership role, because you need to get things done quite quickly. And it's easy to just tell them what to do, but you're not actually building capability and capacity in your team when you do that, are you? So
no,
it takes a little bit more time, but in the end, you actually do get the rewards.
Oh, absolutely. And look, I mean, you can ask questions. I mean, that sort of say, but didn't we say this was going to be finished tomorrow? I mean, that sort of stuff. I mean, plus the obvious stuff. I mean, have an open door and, be a human being, all that sort of stuff. I mean, I like to think I've always been absolutely approachable. But, here again, you always have to remember that you are, in fact, the team's leader. And, there's a slight difference. There's a subtle difference to that, to being part of the team.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so 2 more questions. And I think that's an interesting thing that you brought up, is about there is a slight difference, because what we're finding is that there is a real challenge when people are transitioning from the technical person in a team, and then they get promoted to the frontline leader or the first-time people leader. So can you perhaps share with us what's one thing that you, like, if you were to give them one piece of advice for people who are moving into this frontline manager, people leader position, that they could take away today?
Wow, that's a really tricky. Yeah, it is a really tricky thing. I mean, the analogies are huge. You can, from being a cracking footballer to being a coach doesn't. From being a fantastic player in a team sport of any variety to suddenly being made the captain does not always work, right?
Yes.
And it's the same in business, we see it at every level, right? A terrific tradesman doesn't necessarily make a great supervisor, and onward through, a great engineer doesn't necessarily make a great manager. So it is really, really, really tricky. So there are and some people will never get there, right? So it's, when I say never get there, that's not necessarily a negative. I mean, you have to value technical expertise.
Yeah.
And oftentimes the really, really good technical people, sometimes they don't even want to be managers, or they think they do, but when they get there, it's like, this isn't quite, I'd rather...
Absolutely, you've got to have the will.
Doing my technical stuff. So the first things first is to actually understand, do I really want to do this?
Yes.
Right? This is something because it's not what I was doing yesterday, it's something different. I'm no longer doing the technical stuff. I'm now actually leading a team of people who are doing the technical stuff. Sure, I'll do bits and pieces, and I might have to provide some guidance, but I'm no longer getting my hands dirty, to use the term necessarily. So there's the recognition of that first, and understanding it, and then it's, I think, getting some guidance from others who are in management roles, getting some mentoring, getting some advice. How do I actually do this? And sometimes, people relate to it in different ways. Some people can do that by, I guess, reading a bit about it, and others, I've had some particularly expressive people in my team who would come to me and say, what do you think I'm doing wrong? How can I do this better? And so on and so forth. So don't be afraid to ask questions of more senior staff or peers. But it's fundamentally, it's that recognition of, I'm no longer doing the doing necessarily. I'm leading a team of doers.
Beautiful. I remember writing a post about that, about people a couple of years ago, and that's the fundamental question that we get people to ask themselves is, do I want to do this?
Yes.
Yeah, spot on. So do I want to do this? Have I got the skills? And if not, go get them, and then seek advice from, senior leaders. I think that's great. Really good feedback. Thanks, Richard. Okay, so just wrapping up now, we're very interested in resilience and wellbeing, and a lot of our leadership programs always have a component of that. And knowing your level of energy, how do you keep on top of your, health and wellbeing?
Me personally.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, okay. For me, I've always, I'd be lying if I said I've always tried to stay pretty fit. There were periods in my life where I perhaps, let things go, and often they were associated with pretty heavy periods of work commitment. But I was able to knock myself out of that, and it always gets tricky between family, work, kids, depending on their age, etc., etc., etc. And things have gone off the rails. But I tend to try and stay reasonably fit by devoting half an hour a day, probably every day. If not every day, then 6 days a week, to some pretty vigorous exercise. But it varies. As in what I might do varies, but it's every day. And for me, it's every morning, because that way, regardless of how poor a night's sleep I've had or everything else, that time's my age. It's the time I would have most to myself. In my experience with 2 girls growing up in the house and being relatively busy at work, the morning was the best time for me to devote half an hour, 45 minutes to some pretty rigorous exercise, and then I was ready for the day. I mean, everything else aside, you're completely awake, your mind's sharp, your brain's woken up. You cannot tell me that it's not massively beneficial for your ability to think and act at work and in every other way. So I actually can't emphasize the value of doing frequent exercise enough.
Oh, here, Richard. We did a podcast with another managing director of a large water utilities company, and we asked him, what he thought would be, his number one piece of advice for people, leaders in general, and he said to your well-being. Your well-being is the most important thing, because like you said, it impacts so many other things, your brain function, level of enthusiasm,
Absolutely.
Energy levels. Yeah.
Yeah, so no matter how bad a night's sleep I've had, if I do a really good session in the morning, I'm good to go for the day. And then, importantly, in terms of the broader well-being, when you're not at work, don't be at work. Now, for some people, that's forget about everything. For others, and for me, for example, I have no problem with having my phone nearby and knowing what's going on, but I might not react, right?
Right. I know. I'm like, there's usually, my phone is like no longer than like 1 or 2 meters away from me. So I've actually had to have strategies that, okay, in the morning I don't look at it until I've done some physical activity. I've gone out, done something, and then I give myself permission. It doesn't always work, but I'm working on it. Yeah. Well, that's been so insightful. Thank you, Richard. Really appreciate it. And we'll be in touch and continue this kind of discussion.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the People Leaders Podcast. For show notes and other resources, please visit us at peopleleaderspodcast.com. And while you're there, you can subscribe for future episodes so you can continue your own leadership journey. And please be sure to share this and other episodes with your friends and colleagues. The People Leaders Podcast is brought to you by the Experts on Air Podcast Network.